Tonight marks not just a shift in tone, but the emergence of a pattern, a series of coordinated moves that, taken together, feel less like isolated provocations and more like the early stages of a rapidly evolving strategy. At the center of this moment stand two capitals, Washington and Beijing, locked in a complex negotiation over power, influence, and strategic patience. At the same time, a third and far more volatile theater in the Middle East is exerting pressure on both, stretching their calculations and complicating their choices. What emerges is not a single crisis, but an intersection of multiple domains: trade policy, technological control, financial leverage, and even the flow of weapons. These are no longer separate tracks. They are converging into a single geopolitical contest where each move in one domain reinforces or constrains options in another. In that context, the prospect of a summit between the leaders of the United States and China has taken on outsized significance. It is no longer just a diplomatic engagement. It has become a potential inflection point, either a reset that stabilizes competition or a fragile détente that masks deeper structural tensions. To understand why this moment matters, it helps to consider the long-standing tension between principle and practice in China's approach to U.S. sanctions. For decades, Beijing has publicly criticized American secondary sanctions, arguing that they represent an overreach of U.S. jurisdiction and an abuse of financial dominance. Yet in practice, China's largest exporters, banks and financial institutions, have generally complied with these measures. The reason was pragmatic: access to the US-dominated global financial system, especially dollar clearing, was too valuable to risk. Compliance, even if reluctant, allowed Chinese firms to maintain access to global capital and markets. Now, however, there are signs that this calculus is shifting. The directive to ignore certain sanctions is not merely rhetorical, it represents an operational decision, one that signals a willingness to absorb risk in order to protect domestic actors and assert greater autonomy. The shift is significant because it suggests that Beijing is no longer content to operate within a system it criticizes. Instead, it is beginning to test the boundaries of that system more directly. This change has both symbolic and practical implications. Symbolically, it challenges the legitimacy of U.S. sanctions as a tool of global governance. Practically, it creates immediate complications for multinational firms, financial institutions, and governments that must navigate conflicting legal and regulatory frameworks. For Chinese companies, it offers a degree of protection, but also introduces uncertainty about long-term access to international markets. For foreign firms operating in China, it raises difficult questions about compliance, risk exposure, and strategic alignment. When viewed in isolation, any one of these actions might appear limited or defensive, but taken together, they reveal a broader pattern. Beijing is probing the limits of economic and technological pushback across multiple fronts. It is tightening control over market access, reinforcing supply chain choke points, and asserting greater authority over cross-border transactions. Each of these moves aligns with long-standing priorities: safeguarding strategic industries, preventing the outflow of critical technologies, and strengthening domestic innovation ecosystems. At the same time, these actions have immediate tactical effects. They provide Chinese negotiators with additional leverage, they complicate the operating environment for American firms, and they send a clear signal to global partners: China is willing to use the tools of state power, economic, legal, and regulatory, to shape outcomes in its favor. The situation becomes even more complex when viewed through the lens of security and military dynamics. Allegations or perceptions? TC so. Had China maybe enabling or facilitating the transfer of weapons to actors in the Middle East introduce a new dimension to the rivalry. Whether such claims are fully substantiated or not, their impact lies in how they are perceived and interpreted. In international politics, perception often drives policy more quickly than verified facts. If a major power is believed to be supporting entities that are actively challenging US forces or allies, the implications are profound. It represents not just a diplomatic disagreement, but an escalation across multiple domains: economic, political, and military. Even the possibility of such support can harden attitudes, accelerate defensive measures, and reduce the space for compromise. This dynamic underscores a broader truth. The boundaries between economic competition and security rivalry are increasingly blurred. Trade restrictions can have strategic consequences. Technology controls can shape military capabilities. financial sanctions can influence geopolitical alignments. In this environment, actions that might once have been considered technical or administrative take on strategic significance. Amid these developments, there is also an element of political signaling, what might be described as strategic theatre. Leaders project confidence, emphasize leverage, and frame outcomes in ways that reinforce their domestic and international positions. The assertion of holding the upper hand is part of this dynamic. It is not necessarily inaccurate. The United States retains significant structural advantages, including control over key financial systems, technological leadership in critical sectors, and a network of alliances. However, power is not simply a matter of resources or capabilities. It also depends on credibility, the belief among others that threats will be carried out and assurances will be honored. If Washington signals that it is willing to tolerate certain actions in order to secure a broader diplomatic objective, such as a high-level summit, that signal will be closely analyzed by both allies and adversaries. It may invite further probing, testing the limits of what is acceptable. This creates a delicate balancing act for policymakers. On one hand, there is value in maintaining diplomatic engagement, reducing tensions, and exploring areas of cooperation. On the other hand, there is a need to uphold norms, enforce boundaries, and deter actions that could undermine security or stability. Navigating this tension requires careful calibration. Too much flexibility can be perceived as weakness, while too much rigidity can close off opportunities for de-escalation. The United States still possesses a range of powerful tools. Financial sanctions remain one of the most effective mechanisms for imposing costs. Export controls can restrict access to critical technologies. Tariffs can shape trade flows. And the designation of companies as national security risks can have far-reaching consequences. These tools, however, are not without drawbacks. Overuse or misapplication of economic coercion can produce unintended consequences. It can encourage the development of alternative systems, financial networks, payment mechanisms, and technological ecosystems that reduce reliance on U.S. infrastructure. It can also strain relationships with allies, particularly if they perceive measures as unilateral or insufficiently coordinated. In the long term, the effectiveness of these tools depends not just on their immediate impact, but on the willingness of others to align with and support their use. This brings us to the importance of alliances. In a multipolar and interconnected world, coordinated action is often more effective than unilateral measures. If the United States and its partners present a unified front, whether on sanctions enforcement, technology controls, or responses to arms transfers, they can amplify their influence and reduce opportunities for exploitations. Conversely, divisions among allies create openings for strategic maneuvering. Achieving such coordination, however, is not straightforward. Allies have their own interests, constraints, and perspectives. Economic ties with China vary widely. Risk tolerance differs. Domestic political considerations can shape foreign policy decisions. Building consensus takes time, and crises often demand rapid responses that leave little room for extensive consultation. In the near term, several trends are likely to define the trajectory of this evolving situation. First, there will be continued tactical probing. Beijing will test boundaries across economic, legal, and informational domains, seeking to expand its room for maneuver without triggering a broader confrontation. These probes may take the form of regulatory changes, targeted enforcement actions, or selective non-compliance with external pressures. Second, Washington will attempt to navigate a narrow path. It will seek to preserve the potential benefits, engagement, particularly the symbolic and practical value of a high-level summit, while also signaling that certain actions carry consequences. This will likely involve a combination of public messaging, targeted measures, and behind-the-scenes negotiations. Third, uncertainty will increase in global markets and business environments. Companies will reassess risk exposure. Legal teams will revisit compliance frameworks. Investors will factor in the possibility of greater state intervention in cross-border transactions. Supply chains already under strain from previous disruptions may face additional adjustments as firms seek to mitigate geopolitical risk. Finally, narratives will play a crucial role. In an era of contested information and strategic communication, the way events are framed can shape outcomes as much as the events themselves. Intercepted shipments, blocked acquisitions, regulatory directives, these are not just isolated incidents. They are signals interpreted through the Lael for conflict and of broader strategic competition. These signals influence expectations, they inform policy decisions, they shape the behavior of states, companies, and individuals. And once established, narratives can be difficult to change, even in the face of new evidence. Stepping back, it becomes clear that this moment represents a new chapter in a long-standing story. The relationship between the United States and China has always been characterized by a mix of cooperation and competition. What has changed is the intensity and scope of that competition. It now encompasses not just economic and political domains, but technological, financial, and security dimensions as well. The central question is no longer whether tensions will persist, they will. The question is how those tensions will be managed. Will they be channeled into structured competition with clear rules and mechanisms for de-escalation? Or will they harden into rivalry with fewer guardrails and greater risk of miscalculation? The coming weeks will be critical. Diplomatic engagements, policy decisions, and public messaging will all contribute to shaping the trajectory. A successful summit could provide a framework for stabilizing relations, even if underlying differences remain. A failure or a perceived imbalance in concessions could deepen mistrust and accelerate divergence. In this sense, the stakes extend beyond the immediate issues at hand. They touch on the broader architecture of the international system, the rules, norms, and institutions that govern interactions among states. They also affect the lived realities of businesses, workers, and communities around the world, whose livelihoods are tied to global trade and stability. Ultimately, the situation underscores a fundamental reality. In a world of interconnected challenges, actions in one domain reverberate across others. Economic decisions have security implications, technological policies influence geopolitical alignments, diplomatic gestures can alight crisis plus strategic calculations. For Washington, Beijing, and the rest of the world, navigating this complexity will require not just power, but judgment. It will require an understanding of both immediate incentives and long-term consequences, and it will require a recognition that in a system defined by interdependence, the line between competition and cooperation is often thinner than it appears. The outcome remains uncertain, but what is clear is that the choices made now will shape the contours of global politics for years.